When you look at what we're capable of as human beings, it's easy to realize that the greatest limitations we face are the ones we impose on ourselves. From the time you are born, you're surrounded by systems designed to tell you how far you can go, what you should settle for, and where the boundaries are. Most people accept that framework and operate within it, but you are built for something far beyond those boundaries. There is a point when you have to stop accepting the world as it's handed to you and start shaping it according to what it could be. Think about it, every technology we rely on today was created by people who simply refused to accept limitations. They questioned the status quo, they pushed past ridicule, they worked until what seemed impossible became inevitable. Those people weren't superhuman. They just chose not to settle. It's easy to look around and assume greatness belongs to someone else, someone with better credentials, resources, or natural talent. That's a misconception. What really sets extraordinary people apart is sustained effort toward bold ideas, a willingness to fail repeatedly, a mindset that says, this may take longer than expected, but it can be done. In our lives, we often wait until conditions are perfect before we start, but there's no such thing as a perfect moment. The moment is now. Progress isn't made by waiting for permission, it's made by taking action. You're built for more than comfort, more than routine. You're built for expansion, to push edges, to explore uncharted areas in your own potential. Whether it's tackling ambitious problems in technology, transforming an industry, or rethinking what's possible in your community, you carry the capacity to do these things. And you don't need anyone to validate that. Real impact is created when you pursue the kind of ideas that scare you a little, ideas that disrupt, stretch, and challenge you. If an idea doesn't make your pulse quicken, it might not be bold enough. Step back for a moment and consider what your life could look like if you stopped treating your potential like a fragile resource that needs to be rationed. What if you treated it like a renewable source of energy, something that actually grows when you use it? That's what happens when you start building towards things that excite you. You gain momentum, you build resilience, you discover that the ceiling was just an illusion. There's a misconception that innovation happens in massive leaps, but the truth is, it happens in incremental steps stacked day after day. You don't have to solve the entire problem overnight. Make one improvement, then another, then another. Multiply that by weeks, months, years, and you'll look back and hardly recognize the starting point. You'll see that what once looked impossible became inevitable through deliberate forward motion. The world doesn't need more passive observers. It needs people willing to take responsibility for making things better. People who don't complain about flaws but design solutions. People who don't wait for others to step up because they know they can. That kind of mindset creates breakthroughs. That kind of mindset builds the future. So ask yourself, what problem keeps you up at night? What challenge ignites your curiosity? What improvement are you passionate about making, even if it takes years of effort? That's where you need to focus, because once you direct your energy into work that actually matters to you, something shifts. Obstacles don't feel like barriers anymore, they feel like puzzles waiting to be solved. You are not here to repeat what's already been done. You are not here to blend in, to accept mediocrity, or to live inside someone else's idea of possible. You are built for more ambition, more creativity, more courage. And the world is waiting for the moment when you decide to act like it. To challenge conventional limits and take ownership of shaping what's possible, you must begin by rethinking the way you interpret the world around you and rejecting the silent assumption that someone else is responsible. Building the future you want to see. Most people move through life following predefined paths, adopting systems and standards that have existed for years without ever questioning whether those structures actually reflect the current opportunities. But you are capable of more than simply following an existing blueprint. The first step is to recognize that many of the boundaries you encounter are not physical. They are conceptual. Society often reinforces the idea that success has a narrow definition, that achievements must follow a predictable timeline, and that risk must always be avoided. You need to mentally detach from that construct and train yourself to see those limitations as variables, not absolutes. Once you start looking at those limits as changeable, it opens up the ability to redefine what success means to you and how far you are willing to push yourself. This mindset unlocks the realization that it is not only possible but necessary to initiate progress rather than wait for someone else to deal with the obstacles around you. You have to adopt the mentality that all progress begins with individual responsibility. When you walk into a situation and see that something could work better, treat that as an invitation to build a solution instead of accepting it as an unfortunate circumstance. It might seem easier to complain or point to others who have more resources or authority, but real innovators do the opposite. They take ownership even of things outside their immediate domain. They operate under the assumption that the responsibility for solving a problem belongs to whoever has noticed it and has the drive to change it. Once you shift into this mode of thinking, you stop looking for excuses and start looking for mechanisms. Every limitation becomes a puzzle to solve rather than a wall that stops your advance. When faced with resistance, remind yourself that progress rarely happens in comfort zones. A key part of challenging limits is the willingness to question long-held assumptions, including your own. Evaluate whether a certain practice exists because it's genuinely optimal or just because it's the way things have always been done. If you discover inefficiencies or outdated structures, start experimenting with different approaches. Even if no one around you is doing it, trust your ability to generate a better alternative. There's no need to wait for consensus before taking action. Consensus often forms after someone proves a new direction works. Taking ownership also means cultivating self-trust. You'll encounter moments where the uncertainty is heavy and there will be no clear path forward, and in those moments, you have to rely on your own reasoning and creativity. Instead of defaulting to traditional answers, design your own. This might require rapid iteration, building prototypes, testing ideas, scrapping what doesn't work, and rebuilding from scratch. But that is exactly how boundaries are broken. You don't become someone who shapes possibility by playing it safe. You do it by constantly asking, what if this could be done differently? And pursuing that question even when others dismiss it. Taking ownership means accepting that the future you envision isn't going to build itself. You have to carry it from imagination into reality. Start by identifying specific areas where improvement is needed, whether in your career, community, or an entire industry, and then break down what would need to change for that improvement to become real. Map out the current constraints and analyze them one by one. Some constraints will be technical, some will be resource-based, and others will be cultural or attitudinal. You don't have to eliminate them all at once. Start with one. Create small but meaningful interventions to demonstrate that change is possible. This is how momentum begins. As you progress, make it a rule to never accept "that's just how it is" as a valid explanation. There is always a reason behind a system, and once you understand that reason, you can either refine it or redesign it. Don't underestimate the ripple effect you can generate with a single bold action. One disciplined individual challenging a conventional limit can inspire a chain reaction of others who had the same thought but were waiting for someone else to lead. Ownership then becomes contagious. People begin to adopt responsibility instead of deflecting it, and suddenly what once seemed impossible becomes normalized. To stay in this mindset, remind yourself daily that innovation is not reserved for a special class of people. It comes from ordinary individuals who decide that the status quo is no longer acceptable. and that building something new is more appealing than staying comfortable. You must cultivate a relentless curiosity about how systems work and where they fail, always asking why and never settling for vague explanations. This attitude will often put you at odds with complacency, which can be uncomfortable. But that discomfort is a signal that you are approaching a threshold where real change can happen. Maintain the discipline to keep moving forward when things get challenging, because that is precisely when many give up and default back to conventional thinking. The goal is not to prove that you are smarter than others, but to prove that change is attainable through consistent action and thoughtful design. Even small steps accumulate into paradigm shifts if you persist long enough. Surround yourself with people who also question limits, who refuse to accept mediocrity, and who push you to refine your ideas rather than shrink them. Collaboration with such people will accelerate your ability to take ownership on a larger scale. In time, you will notice that the very limits that once seemed permanent start to shift under the pressure of your actions. This is the point when shaping what's possible becomes less of a theoretical concept and more of a daily practice. Each new step forward generates data, insight, and confidence that enables you to push even further until you reach the edge of what anyone has attempted before, and to focus on incremental progress that compounds over time toward ambitious goals. You need to internalize the idea that large-scale achievement is rarely the result of a single dramatic leap, but rather the accumulation of countless small actions executed with consistency and precision. Too many people become discouraged when their initial efforts do not produce immediate, visible results, assuming that progress should be rapid and undeniable from the start. In reality, the early stages of any significant journey often feel slow, even invisible, and it is during these stages that many give up. What separates those who ultimately reach ambitious goals from those who fall short is the ability to stay engaged through the quiet, unglamorous phases of steady advancement. The key is to direct your attention toward the process, not the outcome, and understand that each incremental step builds a foundation for the next. Even small improvements create momentum, and this momentum compounds in far more powerful ways than most people realize. When you deliberately focus on refining your skills or improving your system by even a small percentage each day, you are quietly increasing your capacity to operate at a higher level. This compounding effect is not linear, and because of that, the full benefits are not immediately visible. You must have the patience and discipline to continue, knowing that every repetition strengthens the infrastructure necessary to support greater breakthroughs later on. Think of it like building a complex engine. At first, it may feel like you're spending a tremendous amount of time on individual components, carefully crafting each one even though they appear insignificant when isolated. The temptation is to rush or skip certain steps in the hopes of getting to the finished result faster. But if you do this, the engine will not function properly under pressure. By taking the time to methodically assemble each part, test its effectiveness, and refine it when necessary, you are creating a system capable of handling the demands of ambitious goals. What appears to be slow progress is actually an investment in structural integrity. Once the system is complete and activated, all those individual components work together with exponential power. The people who achieve sustained success are those who respect the compounding nature of small efforts and refuse to rush through the process in search of a shortcut. When you center your work around incremental progress, you begin to see each day as an opportunity to get slightly better at something. Instead of being overwhelmed by the magnitude of the ultimate goal, you break it down into smaller, manageable tasks. This reduces resistance and makes it easier to take consistent action. Over time, This consistency becomes a habit, and once something becomes habitual, it no longer requires the same amount of energy or willpower to accomplish. This frees up mental capacity to dedicate to more complex or creative elements of your work. The compounding effect extends beyond the practical results. It also builds confidence. Every completed task reinforces your belief that further progress is possible, reinforcing a cycle of positive reinforcement that drives deeper engagement and higher levels of performance. This confidence then fuels even bigger steps, which continue to compound. Eventually, you reach a point where the accumulation of small wins has fundamentally shifted your baseline capability, and what once felt ambitious becomes a natural part of your daily rhythm. It is important, however, not to confuse incremental progress with complacency or low ambition. The purpose of focusing on small steps is not to stay within a comfort zone, but to create a sustainable mechanism for pursuing large, challenging goals. In fact, the larger the goal, the more critical it becomes to break it into incremental components. Ambitious objectives can be intimidating and abstract, which can lead to paralysis if you try to confront them in their entirety. By reducing them to specific, actionable tasks, you bypass that paralysis and convert daunting aspirations into executable steps. The real discipline lies in continuing to show up every day, even when those steps feel repetitive or insignificant. There are moments when progress seems stagnant, when you question whether any of your effort is actually making a difference. These are the moments that truly test your commitment to the long-term goal. You must resist the urge to abandon the effort and instead double down on the process, trusting that the invisible compounding effect is still at work. One way to stay aligned with this approach is to measure progress not only by external results, but also by internal metrics. Track improvements in understanding, efficiency, decision making, or the quality of your questions. These internal indicators often shift before any external validation appears. When you identify and celebrate those internal markers, you reinforce the value of incremental progress and maintain motivation. In addition, it's useful to periodically zoom out and recognize how far you've come over a longer time frame. What feels like slow movement data often reveals major transformations when viewed across months or years. This retrospective perspective strengthens your ability to stay focused on the next step without becoming distracted by how far there is left to go. The compounding effect also strengthens adaptability. Each incremental step gives you new information, and that information allows you to course correct in real time. Rather than committing to a rigid plan and hoping it leads you to the right place, you constantly integrate new data and refine your approach. This makes your journey more responsive and resilient. You avoid wasting large amounts of time moving in the wrong direction because each small step acts as a test, a chance to evaluate what's working and what isn't. Over time, you become more skilled at identifying patterns, anticipating obstacles, and allocating effort toward the most impactful areas. This self-correcting mechanism is one of the greatest advantages of focusing on incremental progress, especially when pursuing ambitious goals that involve a high degree of uncertainty. It is essential to maintain a long-term mindset and understand that compounding progress doesn't always produce visible results until a critical threshold is reached. There is a tipping point where the accumulation of incremental improvements suddenly becomes highly visible and powerful. Until that moment, your efforts might go unnoticed by others, and you may even begin to doubt whether the hard work is paying off. But the nature of compounding means that the greatest returns often appear later in the process, after long periods of seemingly modest results. To stay prepared for that tipping point, you need to continue executing steadily, refining your system, and maintaining your discipline. This prepares you to take advantage of opportunities when they arise. Many people miss these opportunities not because they lack talent or ambition, but because they failed to build the foundation that would allow them to capitalize on the moment when it arrived. As you continue this journey, remember that the only way to truly fail is to stop moving forward. Even a very small step keeps you in the process and keeps the compounding effect alive. There will be times when external circumstances slow your progress or force you to take unexpected detours. Rather than viewing these as disruptions, integrate them into your incremental approach. Adjust your trajectory, refine your method, and keep moving. By doing so, you transform opposition into fuel and maintain forward momentum regardless of conditions. The more consistent you are, the more powerful the compounding effect becomes, eventually creating an undeniable force that propels you toward the very goals that once seemed unreachable. Focus relentlessly on the next incremental step, then the next, until the accumulated weight of those steps transforms the landscape around you and reveals new possibilities that were not visible from the starting point, allowing you to pursue meaningful problems with courage and act without waiting for perfect conditions. You must first redirect your focus away from superficial targets and toward the core challenges that actually shape the world around you. Too often people spend their lives tackling problems that are convenient rather than significant, choosing paths where the risks are minimal and the boundaries clearly defined. But meaningful work does not exist inside those safe zones. It lives at the edge of uncertainty, in spaces where the outcome cannot be predicted, and where the gap between the current state and the desired future is wide. When you choose to confront a meaningful problem, you commit to stepping into that uncertainty and refusing to allow fear to dictate the scope of your ambition. Courage in this context is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it, recognizing that the discomfort is a necessary indicator that you are working on something that matters. Waiting for perfect conditions is a form of disguised hesitation, a narrative the mind creates to avoid the exposure that comes with tackling big problems. Perfect conditions rarely exist, especially when dealing with complex or unprecedented challenges. If you wait for every variable to align before taking action, you will find yourself immobilized. Real progress comes from engaging with the problem as it is, with incomplete information and finite resources, and using action to uncover what needs to be done next. When you pursue meaningful problems, you need to anchor yourself in a purpose that transcends immediate gratification. This deeper purpose provides the fuel required to persist through the inevitable difficulties and setbacks that accompany work of this magnitude. You won't always have external validation or guarantees of success, but you will have a clear internal compass that tells you the effort is worth it. The moment you decide to align your actions with something meaningful, you will face forces that try to pull you back toward safety and routine. You might find yourself questioning whether now is the right time, whether you have enough experience, or whether you will be capable of handling the complexity of the challenge. But the truth is that capability increases through action. It is not something you wait to acquire in full before beginning. Every step into a meaningful problem exposes new skills that need to be developed and new knowledge that needs to be acquired. Courage means embracing that learning curve and accepting that you will be imperfect at the start. Each action becomes a form of research, revealing which strategies work and which need to be adapted. People often underestimate how transformative it is to simply begin. Starting a difficult project signals to your mind that the problem is now your responsibility, and that passivity is no longer an option. The moment you engage, your perspective shifts from theoretical possibilities to practical realities. You stop asking if something is possible and start figuring out how it can be done. This transition activates a different kind of thinking, one that relies on creativity, experimentation, and continuous adaptation. It also builds a feedback loop in which each small result informs the next decision. Over time, this iterative momentum becomes stronger than any initial hesitation. In contrast, waiting for perfect conditions allows fear to dominate your decision-making, strengthening the idea that action is only permissible when absolute certainty is achieved. That mindset breeds paralysis and eventually erodes belief in your own capacity to effect meaningful change. Courage also involves resisting the temptation to dilute your objective to make it more manageable. When dealing with meaningful problems, the magnitude of the challenge can be intimidating, and it may feel safer to shrink the problem into something that requires less risk. But doing so defeats the purpose of pursuing it in the first place. Instead of reducing the scope, increase your willingness to confront complexity. Break the problem down into smaller components, not to make it easier, but to make it actionable. Maintain the integrity of the original challenge even as you work through each part. This approach ensures that you remain aligned with the deeper purpose, and that every action contributes directly to addressing the core issue, rather than becoming a distraction. Acting without waiting for perfect conditions also means embracing the idea that progress can begin even before you have full clarity. Sometimes the only way to gain clarity is through action. By engaging with the problem directly, you reveal hidden variables and unforeseen dynamics that no amount of conceptual planning could have uncovered. Working with partial information forces you to stay alert and responsive, which strengthens your decision-making over time. It also accelerates learning because the feedback you receive is grounded in reality rather than speculation. This is especially important when dealing with problems that have no established solution. The path forward is discovered through engagement, not contemplation. Meaningful problems frequently require collaboration, and courage includes the willingness to bring others into the effort before everything is perfectly organized. Waiting until your idea is fully developed before involving others can cause you to miss opportunities to build momentum and gather valuable insights. Inviting collaboration early allows you to benefit from diverse perspectives and accelerates the refinement of your ideas. It may feel uncomfortable to share something unfinished, but doing so demonstrates confidence in the value of the problem and signals to others that progress is more important than perfection. Over time, this collaborative energy creates a network of support and expertise that amplifies the impact of your work. Another element of pursuing meaningful problems with courage is the ability to withstand external skepticism. When you tackle something significant, you will inevitably encounter people who doubt the viability of your approach or question why you are addressing the problem at all. This resistance is often a reflection of their own fear and limited perspective, not a true indicator of the problem's worth. You must train yourself to separate constructive feedback from unproductive doubt, using the former to improve your approach and disregarding the latter so it does not drain your resolve. Courage means protecting the vision from unnecessary noise and staying focused on the long-term impact rather than short-term approval. Taking action in imperfect conditions also requires resourcefulness. Instead of waiting until you have ideal resources, use what is currently available to create the most effective response possible. This mindset fosters innovation because constraints force you to think creatively and maximize the utility of every tool at your disposal. As you build momentum, additional resources often become available. many times as a direct result of the initiative you've already taken. Others are more likely to support a project that is already in motion than one that exists only as an idea on paper. By acting first, you convert potential into reality and create tangible proof that the problem is being addressed. Pursuing meaningful problems also compels you to build emotional resilience. Not every step will lead to immediate success, and some may lead to temporary setbacks that test your resolve. The ability to endure these fluctuations without losing sight of the larger objective is critical. Courage is sustained through a clear understanding of why the problem matters, and this clarity becomes a stabilizing force when external circumstances become turbulent. Reflect regularly on the deeper purpose behind your effort, and remind yourself that discomfort and uncertainty are not signs of failure, but indicators that you are operating in a space where real change can happen. By continuing to act despite imperfect conditions, you demonstrate to yourself and others that progress is possible even in the face of difficulty, and that meaningful problems are not solved by those who wait